What happens after death? For many, this is the most terrifying and mysterious question of humanity. But for the ancient Greeks, death was not the end. It was merely the beginning of a new journey. A journey through shadowy gates, treacherous rivers and unknown territories, where each soul would face its final fate. Yet the underworld was not just a place of suffering and shadows, quite the opposite. Within it, fascinating stories unfolded. Stories of love, justice, revenge, tales as rich as those of the glorious Mount Olympus. With every crossing, a soul could find eternal peace, face terrible punishments, or simply wander in oblivion. Behind all of this, invisible forces guided the destiny of the dead, balancing life and death, order and chaos. But who were these forces? And why was the Greek underworld seen as something so complex, both feared and respected at the same time? In the end, the underworld was much more than an idea of death. It was a reflection of life itself, built on choices, judgments, and secrets that still resonate in myths to this day. For the ancient Greeks, the underworld was not just a shadowy realm where souls wandered aimlessly. It was part of something greater, the balance between life, death, and rebirth. Just as the seasons changed and the fields blossomed after winter, death was also part of an inevitable cycle. Without it, life could not exist. At the heart of this balance was the underworld, a hidden yet essential realm. It was a place of transition, where souls awaited their fate, but not in a chaotic or cruel manner. The underworld had well-defined rules and was governed by a force that even Zeus himself dared not challenge. It's easy to picture Hades as a frightening, villainous figure, as many modern stories portray him. But the truth is that for the Greeks, he was not a villain. Unlike the gods of Olympus who sought glory and the spotlight, Hades played his role far from public view. He was a fair but relentless administrator, ensuring that every soul received the fate it deserved, without exceptions. But Hades did not work alone. Other mysterious forces inhabited the underworld, figures who guided souls on their journey, guarded its gates, and embodied the very essence of darkness. Together, these entities made the underworld a much more complex place than just a realm of the dead. To truly understand this, we need to descend even deeper and uncover the forces that kept this realm in motion. For the Greeks, the image of Hades was always shrouded in mystery. He wasn't the god of thunder, the sea, or war. He ruled something much quieter, yet equally powerful: death. However, Hades was never seen as an evil figure by the ancient Greeks, as many modern interpretations suggest. In the underworld, he was feared, yes, but out of respect for the responsibility his role demanded, not because of any inclination toward chaos or destruction. Unlike other gods, he didn't seek conquests, worship, or grand celebrations atop Olympus. While Zeus concerned himself with power and Poseidon with the dominion of the seas, Hades maintained the unseen order, the one that ensured that every soul, from a humble farmer to a glorious king, would meet its fate after death. He was a cold, yet fair judge. He didn't impose punishments on a whim. If a soul suffered in the underworld, it was because of what it had done in life. If another found eternal peace, it was because its actions had earned that reward. And here lies the crucial difference between Hades and the modern concept of dark figures like the devil. Hades didn't punish because he enjoyed seeing suffering. He administered cosmic justice, maintaining the balance of the universe. His presence wasn't feared because of what he did, but because of what he represented: the inevitable end of all mortal life. Perhaps that's why he rarely left the underworld. While Zeus and the other gods were constantly entangled in human affairs, Hades was discreet, like death itself, a constant presence but always on the margins. However, it was during one of his rare appearances in the world of the living that one of Greek mythology's most significant myths was born. In a moment of desire and strategy, Hades decided to claim a wife: Perséphone, the daughter of Demeter, the goddess of the harvest. The myth begins with an abduction, but like so many stories in Greek mythology, it's filled with symbolic meanings. While picking flowers in a field, Perséphone was taken by Hades to the underworld. For many, this event may seem like a simple act of violence, but the Greeks saw this story as a representation of life's inevitable transformations. Persephone wasn't just an innocent maiden. Her descent into the underworld marked the transition from youth to maturity, from life to death, and most importantly, from death back to life. Demeter's despair over losing her daughter plunged the world into a long winter, as she, being the goddess of agriculture, refused to let the earth flourish while Persephone was gone. But when a compromise was reached, everything changed. Persephone would spend half the year in the underworld with Hades as its queen, and the other half with her mother on the surface. This cycle became the foundation of the myth that explained the seasons. Winter represented the time Persephone spent in the underworld, while spring marked her return to the surface. But beyond symbolizing the changing seasons, Persephone represented the dual nature of human existence. She was the bridge between life and death, between light and darkness. When she was with Hades, she wasn't a helpless prisoner, but a powerful and respected queen. Her presence in the underworld wasn't just an imposition. She adapted to her role and, in a way, learned to embrace it. This doesn't mean her abduction was romantic, but rather that the Greeks understood life's changes as inevitable and often transformative. Hades and Persephone embodied balance. He was the guardian of souls, while she symbolized the potential for renewal and rebirth. It's interesting to think that, while Hades rarely left the underworld, Persephone moved between both worlds, carrying the essence of each. She was neither fully of the earth nor fully of the underworld, just as we mortals are constantly caught between the past and the present, between what we leave behind and what we seek ahead. But if Hades ruled with severe justice, and Persephone symbolized the cycles of nature, what truly shaped the underworld was the delicate dynamic between them. The balance of their forces demonstrated that even in the realm of death there was logic and order. Death wasn't a final end. It was a change of state, a necessary transition for life to continue. However, the underworld didn't run on Hades and Persephone's leadership alone. To keep this cosmic machine functioning, other figures played crucial roles, some demanding payment for passage, others guarding its gates against intruders. After all, who could enter this world, and more importantly, who would be granted permission to leave? For the underworld to function as an ordered realm, rather than a chaotic wasteland of lost souls, it needed more than just a king and queen. It required a system that guided each soul on its final journey, and that system began with a river. Not an ordinary river, but the river Styx, one of the most important barriers between the world of the living and the dead. Its crossing wasn't just a physical task, but a rite of passage, a test to prove that the soul had truly left the earthly world behind. Controlling this passage was Charon, the taciturn and tireless ferryman who navigated the river's dark waters. He asked no questions, showed no pity, and refused passengers who couldn't pay the fare. For the Greeks, this rule was so important that when preparing the dead for burial, they would place a coin, the obol, beneath the tongue or over the eyes of the deceased. Without this coin, the soul would be stranded on the riverbank, unable to cross and doomed to wander aimlessly. It wasn't an exorbitant price, but the lack of payment led to a fate worse than any punishment. This explains why properly burying the dead was considered a moral duty, ensuring that no one was left abandoned between worlds. Charon was neither malicious nor compassionate. He was the intermediary between life and death, fulfilling his role without question. His presence served as a reminder that, in Greek thought, the afterlife was not something one could escape or bargain with. Everything was meticulously planned, and the price of passage was only the first obstacle in a long journey. But crossing the river didn't mean automatic entry into the underworld. Once the souls disembarked on the opposite shore, they faced a new challenge. Cerberus, the monstrous three-headed dog who guarded the gates of Hades' realm. Cerberus wasn't there to prevent souls from entering. They had already completed their part in life and now belonged to the underworld. His true duty was to stop any soul or intruder from attempting to escape. No mortal could pass through the gates and return to the surface without facing Cerberus's sharp claws and deadly teeth. Although terrifying, Cerberus's role wasn't purely violent. He symbolized eternal vigilance, the unbreakable barrier between worlds. But as with many Greek myths, where even the most fearsome obstacles could be challenged, Cerberus played a key role in one of mythology's most famous feats, the 12th labor of Heracles. The task was simple in theory, but terrifying in practice. Capture the dog and bring it alive to King Eurystheus. To do this, Heracles needed more than brute strength. In some versions of the myth, he negotiated with Hades to temporarily capture the beast, demonstrating that even when facing monsters, dialogue and cunning had their place. In the end, Heracles successfully brought Cerberus to the world of the living, though the creature was quickly returned to its role as guardian. Like Charon, Cerberus wasn't cruel by nature. He merely played his role in maintaining the underworld's balance. While Charon guided souls to their destination, Cerberus ensured that this destination was final and irrevocable. Both embodied the Greeks' view of death as inevitable. No matter who you were in life, once you entered the underworld, there was no turning back. But even with these barriers, the underworld wasn't completely sealed off. Other forces, mysterious entities, shaped the fate of the souls within. To truly understand the workings of this realm, one must look beyond the gates and rivers and delve into the shadowy figures who embodied the very essence of death and darkness. The underworld wasn't just about crossings, guardians, or judgments. It was, in fact, a complex ecosystem inhabited by primordial forces that gave life, or rather death, to its dark and inevitable atmosphere. When souls finally crossed the river Styx and passed through the gates guarded by Cerberus, they didn't just enter a physical territory. They descended into a dimension where darkness itself had form and presence. In this deep realm, Erebus reigned silently. He wasn't an ordinary god, but a personification of primordial darkness, the state that existed even before chaos itself. To the Greeks, Erebus wasn't merely a poetic metaphor for the unknown. He was a living force, the darkness that enveloped not just the underworld, but the moment between the end of life and the beginning of eternity. Everything passed through Erebus: the fear of the unknown, the absolute silence, and the transition of souls to the other side. Entering Erebus's domain was like closing your eyes and sensing the vastness of the void. But even within that void, there was order. That order was enforced by Thanatos, the personification of death itself. While Erebus embodied darkness, Thanatos represented action. He wasn't a malevolent reaper, but an inevitable executor. His presence in Greek stories is more subtle than one might expect, because death, in their view, wasn't something to be glorified, but something to be accepted. Thanatos was often depicted as a calm figure, frequently shown as a winged youth with black wings who peacefully escorted souls, contrasting sharply with the violent and terrifying portrayals of death in other cultures. Thus, the underworld was not a place of chaotic disorder, but of interconnected forces, each playing its role. Thanatos didn't decide when someone would die. He simply arrived at the right time, functioning like a key cog in the machinery of fate. And if Thanatos was the hand that guided the end, the Moirai, or fates as they were called by the Romans, were the ones who wove the thread of life. These three mysterious figures determined not only how long a person would live, but also how their fate would unfold. When the thread was cut, Thanatos carried out his task. It's important to understand that the Greek underworld wasn't a reflection of chaos, but of balance. Everything functioned as part of a natural cycle. Even the shadows, personified by figures like Nyx, the goddess of the night, had a role to play. Nyx, the mother of Erebus and Thanatos, represented not just literal night, but also emotional darkness, unfathomable mysteries, and forces beyond mortal comprehension. She cloaked the underworld in a shroud of silence, creating an environment where death wasn't seen as a violent rupture, but as a return to the source. These forces illustrated that, for the Greeks, death wasn't an isolated event, but part of an intricate web that began before birth and continued long after death. The underworld, with its gods and personifications, functioned like a living organism, where each entity played a role in maintaining cosmic harmony. However, not all souls shared the same fate upon entering this realm. While some would linger in the eternal darkness of Erebus, others were guided to specific regions within the underworld, such as the Elysian Fields, Tartarus, or the Asphodel Meadows. This division of destinies reinforced the idea that life and death, for the Greeks, weren't merely opposites but complementary. The underworld wasn't just a place of punishment, it was an extension of existence itself. The Greek underworld wasn't a simple realm of shadows. It was a complex mechanism, where each soul received the fate their actions in life had earned. Hades maintained the balance, Perséphone symbolized renewal, and figures like Charon and Cerberus ensured that order was upheld. Even darkness and death had their own personifications. Nothing was left to chance. But despite all this order, Hades' power wasn't absolute. Like any Greek god, he too faced limits imposed by forces greater than himself. And this raises an intriguing question. Did any god truly have total control over their domain? Not. Even Zeus, king of the gods, was exempt from this rule. Although seen as all-powerful, his decisions often depended on factors beyond his reach. If you want to understand how even Zeus was challenged, click the video next to this one.